The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to those on the West Coast, I guess. My name is Mark Mather. I'm with PRB. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on disaggregating ACS data by race ethnicity. This is an important topic and one that regularly comes up in our conversations with ACS data users. We are very fortunate today to have three expert panelists for the webinar today. We have Talise Johnson and Brittany Rico, who are both statisticians in the Racial Statistics Branch at the U.S. Census Bureau. And then after their presentation, we have Alicia Van Orman, who is a Senior Research Associate in our U.S. Programs Department at PRB. We also have additional staff on the line from the Census Bureau, who will be available if needed during the question and answer period. So we are going to save questions to the end, but if you have a question, you can type it into the question box. You should be able to find that in your control panel there on the right-hand side of your screen. And so you can type in questions at any time. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so if you do need to leave early, you'll be able to access the recording later. You should receive an email with a link to the recording in the next few days. Brittany, I will turn it over to you to start things off.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We are pleased to be here with you to discuss disaggregating American Community Survey data by race and ethnicity. And as Mark mentioned, my name is Brittany Rico, and my colleague, Talise Johnson, and I are both senior analysts in the Racial Statistics Branch at the U.S. Census Bureau, and we are excited to talk about race and ethnicity data today. So we will start off the presentation by sharing a brief overview of the American Community Survey, discuss federal standards for measuring race and ethnicity data, and then we'll go over recent changes to Hispanic origin and race questions, and then we'll get into the good stuff, looking at ACS tables disaggregated by race and ethnicity. So the American Community Survey is an ongoing national survey that samples approximately 3.5 million addresses annually. And these data are collected continuously throughout the year to produce annual population and housing estimates. And the ACS is the only source of critical information for many of its topics, for small areas and for small population groups. And we release two different sets of estimates each fall in the form of the 1 year and the 5-year period data sets. So the American Community Survey, like all federal information collections, must follow standards established from the U.S. Office of Management and Budget when collecting race and ethnicity data. And the Office of Management and Budget minimum categories for data on race and ethnicity for federal statistics, program administrative reporting, and civil rights compliance reporting are defined as follows. So the OMB requires 2 minimum categories for data on ethnicity, and these are Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino. And the Office of Management and Budget also requires 5 minimum categories for race, and these are American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white. And people may report multiple races. And additionally, the Census Bureau is also required by Congress to use the category some other race on the American Community Survey and on the decennial census. So before we discuss specific American Community Survey tables disaggregated by race and ethnicity, we want to highlight some improvements that have been made to the question designs, processing, and coding for the Hispanic origin question and the race question in 2020. So several significant changes were made to these questions, and we improved the ways we process the data and how we code the responses to these questions. And these improvements and changes enabled a more thorough and accurate depiction of how people self-identify, yielding a more accurate portrait of how people report their Hispanic origin and race within the context of a 2-question format. And the changes implemented in the 2020 American Community Survey are the same changes that were implemented in the 2020 census. So for the Hispanic origin question, we updated the instructions and the example groups provided in order to represent the largest Hispanic origin population groups and the geographic diversity of the Hispanic or Latino category. So data users can refer to the user note entitled Improvements to the Hispanic Origin Question, and this is shown here on our slide, to learn a little more information about how these changes to the Hispanic Origin Question were done. And we also made several design improvements to the race question for the 2020 American Community Survey, so we'll go over these. In response to community feedback over the past decade, we added dedicated write-in response areas and examples for the white and the Black or African American racial categories. And we provided 6 example groups for each of the white, Black or African American, and American Indian or Alaska Native racial categories. And these examples represent the largest population groups within each of the geographically diverse population groups of each race category, as defined by the 1997 Office of Management and Budget Standards. We also made updates to the detailed Asian and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander checkboxes by reordering the checkboxes by population size and updating Guamanian and Chamorro to Chamorro. And we also made updates to the instructions for the some other race category. And to learn a little bit more about the improvements to the race question, you can also click on the slide that we have here available on, the link that we have available here on this slide to learn more about the improvements and changes to the Hispanic origin and race questions. So now I'm going to pass it over to Talise, who will be going over the ACS data products.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here. Again, my name is Talise Johnson. I'm a senior analyst in the racial statistics branch, and we'll be just very happy to talk about the ACS data products that are very important, and I know that has a lot of interest. So we have 2 ACS data products that I will focus on today that are iterated by detailed race and Hispanic origin groups. So the first one is table S0201. This is our selected population profile in the United States. This is an annual table. It provides broad social, economic, housing, and demographic estimates for a large number of our race, ethnic, ancestry, and country of birth groups. For this particular presentation, we will focus only on race and ethnicity. The population threshold for this specific population group is at least 65,000. And next slide, please. The second set of data products are the selected population tables, also known as SPT, and the American Indian and Alaska Native tables, also known as the AIANT tables. They provide reliable estimates, again, of our demographic, social, economic, and housing characteristics for select race, tribal, Hispanic origin, and ancestry populations. These tables are produced every 5 years. Now, there are over 250 detailed tables that are produced by detailed race and ethnic groups. For example, we look at topics like sex by age, commute to work, poverty rates, and household type. These tables provide an in-depth look at detailed population groups beyond those covered in the standard 1-year and 5-year ACS products. The tables are available again every 5 years, beginning with 2006 to 2010, and then the latest one produced 2011 to 2015. The 2016 to 2020 SPT and AIANT tables are under development and planned for release in the spring of 2023. We will provide more information when we have more details. And next slide. So now let's take a closer look at the selected population tables and the American and Alaska Native tables. And so here we want to look at our iteration groups that are available in the ACS population tables. So there are around 400 different population groups. These include an iteration for the total population, all race alone groups and race alone or in combination groups. The iterations are available for a number of multiple race combinations, for example, white, Black, or African American and Asian. And the tables are also iterated by American Indian and Alaska Native tribal groupings, such as Choctaw and Shim, as well as detailed Asian groups such as Bhutanese and Filipino, detailed Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander groups such as Fijian and Tongan, and detailed Hispanic groups such as Paraguayan and Costa Rican. The American Community Survey, American Indian and Alaska Native tables are also part of this data products. Now, these are iterated for around 1,000 population groups. They include the total population, American Indian and Alaska Native tribal groupings, and most importantly, specific American Indian tribes, such as the Yurok tribe, and specific Alaska Native villages, such as the native village of Hooper Bay. And next slide. And also very important for the release of this data are our population thresholds. So they're an integral component in producing these files. First, to be included on the iteration list for the selected population tables, we employ a population threshold of at least 7,000 nationally. For the American Indian and Alaska Native tables, the threshold is at least 100 people nationally. And we use these to determine the iteration list for both of these data products. In order for the data tables to be released for the tables, we also employ a second threshold. The second requirement is that there must be at least 50 members of the iteration group in the survey in that geographic area. So for example, you will only be able to see data for Samoans in Chicago if there were at least 50 Samoans in the city of Chicago. These thresholds ensure the released data will not identify or disclose individuals or households in any particular area. Now, next slide. And so this slide here, we have a list of available tools and resources to access ACS data on race and ethnicity. We have a very important visualization. This is a user-friendly data visualization illustrating how race and ethnicity have been measured in the U.S. decennial census from 1790 to 2020. We also have referenced here some data gems. They are short videos walking you through how to access our Hispanic and race information. And finally, the selected, the special population tables and the American Indian and Alaska Native tables documentation page. This is an excellent resource for those two data products that I just went over. They have a list of all the available tables, how to access them, as well as information regarding their population groups and geographies. Okay, now that we've kind of given you a background of these ACS data products, now we want to demo them and walk you through how to access them. So we're going to start here. This is data.census.gov. This is the data dissemination platform to access our demographic and economic data for the Census Bureau. So there are multiple ways to access these tables, but I will walk you through the path that I take. So you can actually, underneath the microphone, we're going to go to the advanced search button. And we're going to demo the table S0201 selected population profile first. So on the left-hand side, we have our filters. We're going to click on surveys. We're going to choose the American Community Survey. And we're going to choose 1-year estimates. As we know, table S0201 is an annual table. And then we're going to choose selected population profile. And we're going to click the search button down here on the right-hand side. And so this shows you table S0201. Let's go ahead and click on that. So you can see what's in here. And so you see the actual table here. We have right now the total population. And so now let's choose our detailed race and ethnic groups. So we're going to go to the left-hand under filters again, and we get to race and ethnicity by clicking on topics. And then here you'll see race and ethnicity. And here you see all of the folders and the race groups. So particularly we're going to look at these folders because they have the detailed race and ethnic groups there. So the first group that we'll demo here is let's choose the Hispanic or Latino folder. And then here we have detailed Hispanic origin or Latino. And you can see the list of groups there of Hispanic or Latino detailed groups. And for this demonstration, we're going to choose Mexican and Honduran. And also while we're here, the strength of the ACS is to look at these lower levels of geography. So we're going to look at a lower level of geography. We're going to look at county level. So again, on the left-hand side, we can go ahead and choose geography. We'll choose the state of Texas. So we'll actually choose county to select the geography. And then we'll choose the state of Texas. And we're going to choose Harris County, Texas. And this is just knowledge of where we have large Latino populations here. And we're going to close those double arrows. And here you can see for table SO201, we've chosen Mexican and Honduran, and they have the total population of those two detailed Hispanic origin groups. And within table SO201, it has, like I mentioned earlier, very broad topics here. If you scroll down, you'll see we have age, we have educational attainment, veteran status, we have commute to work, we have disability status, health insurance, and it ends with the computer internet usage. So you can get a lot of very detailed information for the detailed ethnic group or race group that you're interested in. So that is table SO201. And now let's do a new search. We're going to clear this out by going up to the left-hand corner and clicking on the US Census Bureau logo again, and that'll clear out this search. And now let's take a look at these special population tables, our selected population tables. So here again, we're going to click Advanced Search. We're going to go on the left-hand side under Filter to click on Surveys. We're going to choose American Community Survey again. And these are the tables that are produced every 5 years. So we're going to click on our 5-year estimates. Okay, and here we have, we produced the American Indian and Alaska Native detailed tables. I'm not going to demo this for this particular presentation because it's very similar to the selected population detailed tables demo. So, but you see that's where you would click if you wanted to go to the specific American Indian and Alaska Native detailed table files. So, but we're going to choose on the selected population detailed tables. And then we'll go ahead and click search. And so here I wanted you all to see that, there are 280 tables that are linked to this particular product. And they're all of our socioeconomic housing detailed tables that are not normally produced for detailed ethnic and race data in our standard ACS products. So here I'm interested in education. So once we've chosen that, we can go to the search button and click and type in education to get some of our education tables. And so let's take a look at B15002. This is sex by educational attainment for the population 25 years and over. Okay, and so here again, you can see that we have the total population and then we have educational attainment by sex. So we're going to go ahead and choose our detailed race and ethnic groups. So we will go to topics. So I'm showing you a slightly different way of how to get that, a view of how to select these filters. So again, here we have topics. We're going to choose race and ethnicity. And for this one, let's choose detailed Asian group. So let's click on the Asian folder. And then we'll click on detailed Asian alone. And again, here you see the list of detailed Asian groups here. And we're going to select Asian Indian and Japanese just as an example. Okay, and again, we want to look at a lower level of geography here. So we're going to go back up here and select geo. And we're going to look at place level information. So here, let's look at the state of California. And let's look at Los Angeles City in California. And then we'll click there on Los Angeles City. Okay, and here again, you see that it's been chosen for Los Angeles City, California. We have the two iteration groups, Asian Indian alone and Japanese alone. And you can see their total population. And so you have their estimate and their margin of error. And so this is how you access this data. And of course, for these particular data, you can, we've kind of demoed the different groups, but we have detailed ethnic and race groups for Asian population, for the Native Hawaiian population, for the Hispanic origin population. Okay, so this will end our demo for this. And this will actually end our part of the talk. And so thank you so much for your attention. We look forward to any questions and discussion at the end of the talk. So now we'll hand it back over to Mark.
Great, thanks, Delise. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Alicia Van Orman.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble making sure I have the right screen being shown.
We did see your presentation there a couple times and then it went away.
Then it paused. Yes, just give me just a second. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
All right, can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mark. All right, welcome everybody. I will continue discussing how to disaggregate American Community Survey data by race and ethnicity.
And we do see your notes as well.
Okay. I'm sorry, guys.
And we do have my colleague Lillian Kilduff from PRB on the line. If you would like her to screen share for you, Alicia, she can do that.
Yes, I think, all right. Is this just my presentation and no notes?
Yeah, actually that looks good.
Okay, great. This is different than when we had demoed this earlier. All right, so I'm going to try to continue. All right, thanks for bearing with me, guys. All right, so in today's presentation, I'm going to provide a brief overview of why disaggregating data by race and ethnicity is important. I'm going to discuss some methodological and analytic challenges and just provide a few examples of using ACS data that's been disaggregated by race and ethnicity. So disaggregating data by race and ethnicity is important because it provides a better understanding of the strengths, needs, quality of life across different groups of people. So we know that there's a long-standing racial and ethnic disparities across many domains that are critical to well-being, such as education, income, employment, health, and housing. By disaggregating ACS data, you can identify, measure, and track racial and ethnic inequalities across many different indicators. This is important for uncovering and understanding the factors that contribute to racial and ethnic inequities. So information on race and ethnicity is also required for many federal programs and is important for developing policies and programs because they can be better targeted for the correct audience and that they can be developed in ways that are sensitive to the audience. So as Talise and Brittany just discussed, the ACS data is designed to be disaggregated into several broad racial and ethnic categories, the minimum categories that are available from the OMB, as well as more detailed categories. So I'm going to start off by showing how to disaggregate data by these broad racial and ethnic categories. So for example, say you're trying to learn more about the educational credentials of the people that are living in your community. We can look at the percent of the population ages 25 and over that have at least a bachelor's degree. In the United States in 2021, 35% of the total population ages 25 and older have at least a bachelor's degree. But once we've disaggregated the data by race and ethnicity, by the broad categories that are available, we can also see that there's a lot of variation across the different race and ethnic groups. So we can see that there's a low of 16% of American Indian and Alaska Native, as well as 16% of those who have all other self-identities have a bachelor's degree or more, all the way up to a high of 56% of those who self-identify within the Asian category. But we also know that race and ethnicity is much more complex than the broad categories I just presented. So for example, the Asian population in the US is very diverse. There's many different groups, cultures, and histories that are encompassed by this broad group. So that broad category may not give enough information. So as Talise and Brittany showed, you can further disaggregate the ACS data into the respective subcategories. So here I am using that same table that Talise just discussed, the S0201 table, to provide data that's been disaggregated by detailed Asian subpopulations. And so here we can see in 2021 that, again, 56% of the total Asian population has a bachelor's degree or more, but there's considerable variation across the Asian subgroups. So disaggregating data by race and ethnicity does present a few methodological and analytic challenges that you want to be mindful of. The first being that data can only be disaggregated by whatever categories are available. So when you're developing your analytic plan, it's important to think about how the available categories map onto what you're trying to explain or understand. So another challenge is that disaggregated data means that you're working with smaller populations and a smaller pool of the sample data. This can lead to a problem of small numbers and impact the reliability of your estimates. So I'll be going into much more detail about this in just a minute. So trend analysis can also be problematic because categories and data products can change across time. So turning now to working with small numbers. So one of the biggest challenges when disaggregating data by race and ethnicity is working with small numbers. So as you break data into smaller subgroups or smaller geographies, the population in question becomes smaller. This makes it difficult to keep information confidential and to develop reliable estimates. So the Census Bureau is committed to keeping respondent information confidential, and this thus limits what data the Census Bureau can release. A second challenge to providing reliable estimates from survey is providing reliable estimates from survey data. This is because rates based on large numbers, they usually provide stable estimates of a true population rate. In contrast, when you're working with a small population or small numbers, this may provide less consistent estimate of the true population rate. So this is because estimates based on survey data are subject to error due to sampling variability. With smaller populations, it's more difficult to sample a completely representative population, and this means that there's more sampling variable as compared to the total population, and also can lead to potentially less reliable results. So ignoring the reliability of your estimates can have serious consequences. So for example, if you're assessing the needs for a policy or program development, if you ignore whether or not your estimates are reliable, you can potentially either over or underestimate your target population. Likewise, rates based on small numbers may fluctuate dramatically from year to year or differ considerably from one group to another. So such variation can make it look as though rates are changing across time, or that different subgroups are significantly different from each other, even though there's no meaningful difference. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to go over a couple different options for assessing your data reliability and dealing with some of the challenges. So after you've obtained your estimates, you'll need to assess the reliability. You can do this with any of the standard measures of reliability. So you can use the standard error, the margin of error, confidence interval, and the coefficient of variation. The ACS tables that are released on data.census.gov and through other platforms provide a 90% margin of error for both numbers and percents. Smaller margins of error indicate more precise estimates, while larger margins of error indicate that there's a lot of uncertainty around those estimates. When using the ACS tables, it's very likely that you'll need to calculate a rate or combine different categories of numbers together in order to get the estimate that you need. So the Census Bureau does provide formulas for how to calculate standard errors when you're aggregating or calculating rates, and they have formulas for these different scenarios. One place for you to find those formulas is in the Data User Handbook called Understanding and Using American Community Survey Data, what all data users need to know. So what is an acceptable amount of error? So unfortunately, there's no hard or fast rules. The tolerable range for sampling error really depends on your goals and your need for precision. It will say you don't want to provide estimates that are so unreliable or so imprecise that they're not useful or could be misleading. But it is also important to balance the lack of precision with the need to have more data by race and ethnicity. So one rule of thumb that we use sometimes is to look at the width of the confidence interval around an estimate. For many of the applications that I've worked on at PRB, we consider a 90% confidence interval that is larger than 10 percentage points to be unreliable. So you can also use the coefficient of variation. In general, coefficients of variation over 30% indicate less reliable data. There is one thing to keep in mind when you're using the coefficient of variation, and that is that it's very sensitive to the magnitude of rates. So for example, if you have a rate that's very close to 0, say 5%, your coefficient of variation will be artificially large. And for the reverse category, say a rate of 95%, your coefficient will be small. So when you're at those kind of tails of 0 to 1 for a rate, the coefficient of variation is a less useful tool for reliability. So once you've assessed the quality of your desired estimates, you'll need to decide what information you want to provide. So in the best case scenario, your estimate will only have a small amount of error and can just be presented. Sometimes you might have an estimate that's borderline. So say the coefficient of variation is 35% or a confidence interval is 12 percentage points wide. Although these estimates could potentially be misleading because they may not be an accurate representation of the true population estimate, you may decide that providing some information is better than none. So in this case, I generally would recommend that you'd show the estimate along with a reliability measure, along with a note that says it should be interpreted with caution. So another option is that you could increase your sample size by aggregating data. So you also might have a scenario where your estimates have such large errors that providing the data as is would not be useful. So in this case, you'll need to do things to either increase the sample size to get more reliable estimates, or you may need to suppress your estimates. So the downside is for aggregating your data is that you might not have the level of precision about your group of interest any longer, but that might be preferable to not having data. Sometimes suppressing your estimates because they're unreliable can be useful because it highlights a need for more or better data. So to increase your sample size, you could, to increase the sample size, you could expand your geographic area of interest. So for example, if you're interested in presenting data for each county, you could combine data across several counties to create county groups and kind of represent regions of a state rather than a single county. Another common way to aggregate data is to combine multiple years of data. So pooling multiple years of data can lead to more reliable estimates simply because they're based on a larger sample. So pooling multiple years of data together does come at a loss of timeliness. So a good example of combining multiple years of data is rather than using the ACS 1-year estimates, that you could use the ACS 5-year estimates. So these estimates pool data across 5 years to come up with a 5-year period estimate. There are also methods available so you can pool or create custom multi-year estimates by pooling 2, 3, or 4 years of ACS 1-year data together. The third option is to collapse categories. So here, rather than showing data for each racial and ethnic group, you could combine subpopulations together to create different groups. So this option may not be ideal for your application because it will mask variation across racial and ethnic groups and makes it appear as though different racial and ethnic groups have similar experiences. However, Sometimes this is the best option because having too many tables with too many suppressed data points may not be useful. So if you choose to aggregate groups, the Urban Institute does have some handy guidelines that are available to help you think through what groups to combine together. I'd also recommend that you'd have a rationale that you explain in anytime you present results with combined groups that explain why you combine the groups together. So just to summarize some of the conceptual considerations for aggregating data, that there are different trade-offs that you need to balance. So it may mean that when you aggregate your data that you could have less current data or data that has less geographic detail or less subgroup specificity. But the choices between these different options depends on the data that's available to you as well as the goals of your analysis. So and this is where I say that the art of data analysis comes in, and you need to really know what's best for your audience and best for what you're trying to show or achieve. I'd also recommend incorporating discussion of some of these constraints into your analysis and display of results because it can be useful in highlighting data gaps. So from a technical standpoint, aggregating data is not without challenge. And there are a few things to keep in mind when combining data across time, geography, or subgroup. So one challenge is that you need to have the finer grained detailed data in the first place. So if you're working with tabulated data that has already been suppressed for disclosure or reliability reasons, you will not be able to aggregate any data. If you're working with microdata, if you have access to the microdata, such as the ACS PUMS files, you have more flexibility to combine data in different ways. You also need to remember the mathematical order of operations when calculating rates. So wherever possible, you want to aggregate your counts for the numerator and then calculate your counts for the denominator and then divide those two to calculate the aggregated rate. Aggregated data also can make calculating your measures of reliability a bit more complicated. So again, the Census Bureau has documentation available for how to calculate standard errors for different ways of aggregating data. Just note that all those methods result in approximation of the standard error. However, if you are using the 5-year estimates, they do have a data product called the variance replicate tables that you can use to obtain an exact margin of error. So then moving on to perhaps one of the more challenging aspects of disaggregating data by race and ethnicity is analyzing trends across time. So racial categories are defined by social, economic, and political institutions. They're not biological, scientific, or anthropological. They're not fixed. So this means that categories that are measured, as well as a person's self-identity, can change over time and can vary as the social context changes. The way that this has been implemented in measurement is that the US government, the way the US government has counted Americans has changed frequently across time, and the racial categories that are captured and the data processing techniques that are used have changed decade to decade across the census. There's also demographic change to think about. So from births, deaths, and migration, they can alter the composition of who may be captured within each broad racial group. So this means that even if a category label has not changed across time, the experiences of the group may have changed simply because the people within that broader category may have changed. So as Talise and Brittany discussed, the 2020 census implemented several changes to the design and processing of the race and ethnicity questions, and that these same changes were implemented in the 2020 ACS. So when we're comparing the 2010 census results to the 2020 census results, we can see that in addition to demographic change, the design and data processing changes reflect a large increase in the multiracial population in the United States. So in the 2010 census, nearly 3% of the population was classified as multiracial. In 2020, the share increased to over 10%. Breaking down the multiracial category into different combinations, we can see that the large increase in the multiracial population is driven by people who identify as white and at least one other additional race, as well as people who identify as a race not listed and at least one additional race. So this means that not only has the size of the multiracial population increased, the composition of the population has also changed relative to 2010. So these changes have important implications for analyzing trends across time in the ACS, because starting with the 2020 ACS, race and ethnicity is measured and processed in the same way as in the 2020 census. The 2020 census results are also used as part of the population controls for weighting the ACS data. This means that if you're comparing 2021 ACS data to 2019 ACS data, you'll see a very large increase in the number of people who identify as multiracial. And because the composition of the group has shifted, it will also be difficult to determine if changes in rates are due to actual changes or are a result of changes in methodology. So for this reason, the Census Bureau has recommended comparing ACS data with the new race and ethnicity design with data from prior years with caution. So for example, when you're comparing differences in the overall racial distributions in the 2016 to 2020 ACS relative to the 2011 and to 2015 ACS, the Census Bureau reported that the differences are largely due to improvements in the design of the two separate questions and processing of those data, as well as some demographic changes. So in addition to simply using caution when interpreting trends over time, you can also think about how the changes in the racial composition could impact your results. So for example, do the racial and ethnic categories that you're using capture more or less advantaged populations across time? You can also link those changes in group characteristics to changes in rates. So unfortunately, there are no ways to completely isolate changes in underlying rates from the methodology changes, but it can be useful to think through how the methodology changes may impact your trend analysis in order to put your results in context. So now I'm just going to show a few examples of trend data by race and ethnicity. So here I'm showing 2019 ACS one-year estimates and 2021 ACS one-year estimates. So I am skipping over the 2020 ACS one-year estimates because the Census Bureau recommends against comparing the experimental 2020 ACS estimates with other ACS data due to data quality issues related to the pandemic. So as in the beginning of the presentation, I'm starting with the share of the population ages 25 and older who have at least a bachelor's degree. So here we can see that there's a very small increase in the percent of the total population with a BA degree or more. Many of the racial and ethnic categories also reflect that same trend. It's generally stable or a very modest increase, except for the multiracial category. Here we see a large decrease. This is counter to what we may have expected and is likely due to methodology changes. Likewise, looking at the share of the population without health insurance, we can see that the total population was generally stable at 9% being uninsured in both 2019 and in 2021. While there are some changes across many of the racial and ethnic categories, there is a very large increase in the multiracial category. Again, this change is likely larger than we would have expected, and in part due to the methodology changes. So you can do this exercise across many different indicators and find that sometimes the results are in line with previous trends and other times they aren't. And these big differences are why the Census Bureau is recommending that you compare with caution. So to close out, I just want to point to additional resources for obtaining data by race and ethnicity. So the ACS Public Use Microdata Sample, also known as the ACS PUMS, allows data users to create variables and combinations of variables that enable use of the detailed race and ethnicity information in combination with many other variables. So these files can be downloaded and analyzed using statistical software, or data users can use the interactive MDAT tool that can be accessed on data.census.gov. So using the microdata can be advantageous because you can tabulate the ACS data by many different combinations of race and ethnicity. And this can be especially helpful if you're trying to isolate race data separate from ethnicity. So looking at non-Hispanic race categories, for example. So the microdata does have some caveats. So the first being that the PUMS data file, it's a subset of the total ACS data. Thus the sample size is smaller and the margins of error are going to be larger relative to the full ACS. The geographic data is also limited. What are known as PUMAs are the smallest available geography. PUMAs are generally county-based and contain about 100,000 people. So this means that small counties are going to be grouped together. Sometimes also PUMAs cross county boundaries. So it can be difficult to isolate individual counties. When using microdata, you'll also need to calculate your own margins of error. And again, the Census Bureau does provide formulas that you can use whether you are using the downloaded microdata files or using the MDAT tool. The Census Bureau also has a webinar on how to use the MDAT tool. And then finally, another source for ACS microdata is through IPUMS. So here you can download a custom data set of the ACS microdata to create custom tabulations, or you can also analyze the data online. One advantage for using IPUMS is that they have worked to harmonize the data across years to the extent that's possible. You can also download smaller data sets that only contain the cases and or variables of interest. So this can make analyzing the ACS PUMS data a little bit easier. One thing to note, though, is that IPUMS does occasionally recode data slightly differently than what is available in the Census Bureau PUMS files. So it's very important to read the data documentation provided by IPUMS so you can understand why your results may be different from the results using the Census Bureau PUMS files. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Alicia. If the other panelists could turn your cameras back on. We do have some questions that have come in, quite a few questions. We actually have over 250 people joining the webinar today, so if we don't get to your question, I'm sure all of the panelists would be happy to answer those offline, so feel free to contact them directly if we don't get to your question today. I'm just going to take these in order. And so this first one's probably for you, Brittany. It came in while you were discussing the changes to the race and Hispanic origin questions and the classifications. So to what extent do you think this will impact the missingness of the data, and how does ACS plan to address that?
All right, thank you for your question. So to what extent do you think the changes to the race question will impact the data? So in terms of missing, I think because we allowed more responses in the race question and in the Hispanic origin question than we did before. So one of the major improvements that we did is in 2010, we were only able to code up to 2 responses in each of the write-in lines. And in 2020, we are now able to code up to 6 race responses or Hispanic origin responses in each of the write-in lines. So I think that the improvements that we made and the changes to the race and Hispanic origin questions are most likely probably not, or allowing for fewer missing data, but whenever we do have missing data, we do have editing procedures to make sure that we capture data for those individuals. But not sure if that answered your question. If not, feel free to send me an email and we can have a discussion about that.
Thanks, Brittany. And we were talking about this issue internally at PRB, and one important thing to remember about census data is that the race and ethnicity questions have tended to change a lot historically. It's not just in 2020, but I think almost in every census since 1790, there have been changes to the way race ethnicity has been classified. It is a social construct, and maybe most notably in 2000, when people were first given the opportunity to select more than one race. So it's nothing new, and it's a challenge that data users have always had to deal with from census to census. Let's see. This is a question for you, Talise. Someone wanted to clarify about the SPTs. Are those not available until 2023? Is that correct? The special?
Oh, yes. Right now, they're scheduled to be released in the spring of 2023. So that will be for the 5-year period of well, actually, we're still in discussion about that. But they're scheduled to be released in the spring of 2023, and we'll provide more details at a later date. So you can email me directly, and we can provide more information about that later. But for right now, it is scheduled for spring of 2023.
Great. And there's a question about you showed information about some tribal data, and someone asked about tribes outside of the U.S.
We do have on our, we have extensive race code lists, and we do have tribal information for tribes that are federally recognized in the United States. And we also have information for Latin American tribes, for people who identify with Latin American tribes and tribes that are not, or Canadian that are not necessarily considered US based tribes. So we have I can give you information on our code list that lists the complete American Indian and Alaska Native list of codes that we collect.
And I think I know the answer to this question for anyone to answer, I guess, but is there any way to compare the new race data with ACS prior to 2020 in a consistent way?
That gets a little tricky. Again, like we all have all said, it's socially constructed. You can make comparisons. Well, we always say compare with caution, but our larger OMB groups are OMB or Office of Management and Budget race categories. I think those may be, if you want to say, somewhat easier to compare versus digging into our detailed race and ethnic groups. But yeah, you'd have to be very careful. And, we have all of our comparison guidance statements to lead you on the kind of the compare with cautions, those that can be compared, but you just have to proceed with caution.
Great. The panelists discussed the count limits for publishing values or geographic units. Could they speak to the impact of differential privacy methodology on the accuracy of these values and on those thresholds? For example, if there were actually 51 people and the differential privacy assigned a value of 49, removing certain people from the tables.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Now that is one that we would definitely have to get back to you on. And I don't know if someone from the American Community Survey staff can answer that question, but it's a very good question, as this topic has come up, just over and over again with the 2020 decennial as well as ACS. But we can get back to you with a more thorough response to that question.
And we do have Gretchen Gooding from the American Community Survey Office on the line. Gretchen, I don't know if you wanted to respond to that query.
I would not be the best person to answer that one, but we can get back to you.
Great.
So,
Go Go ahead, Brittany.
I'd like to, I just wanted to comment about the differential privacy. So the differential privacy methods that have been applied to the 2020 census that has not been applied to the American Community Survey. So I'm not sure if that was maybe a lingering question that someone had. The way we disclose data for ACS or the methodology is different. I don't have the details, but just wanted to clarify that the differential privacy for the 2020 census is different than the way we disclose data for ACS.
Okay. Someone asked how mixed race or multiple race groups are addressed, and that's kind of a broad question. Does somebody want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, so we do collect information on mixed race and multiple race identity. Again, I think we have it, Brittany has placed it in our chat. We have a link to our code list, and you can see those categories in our code list, but we definitely collect that information on mixed race and multiple race identities, and you can see the actual codes on our code list.
And someone asked about the availability of data through the API. So, for example, I think, Talise, you had brought up table B15002 that you demoed. Would that only be available through data.census.gov or also through the API?
Now, there I'm not sure. I would definitely need to lean on someone from the American Community Survey staff if y'all can answer that.
Yeah, the tables that are in data.census.gov are also in the API, so you should be able to access it there.
Great. Let's see.
Thanks, Gretchen.
And are the numbers from filtering by race the same as using the race-specific tables for the race groups that have them, like B15010 for bachelor's degree field for African Americans? So I guess the question is, can you use the filters to get the same results as those special tables?
Do you mean, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Do you mean, can the tables be filtered? We're using the same for the selected population tables, for American Indian, Alaska Native tables. When you're going through data.census.gov, we are using those same filters to get specific information for tables for those particular data products. I'm not quite sure if I understand the question.
Okay. Yeah, I think that one is a little bit confusing. Is the county level the lowest geography for detailed race ethnicity numbers?
No, it's not the lowest level of geography. We have the SPT, the selected population tables, and the American Indian, Alaska Native tables, the documentation link. I think it's also in the chat, and it's also on our slides. It has a complete list of the geographies that are available for the race groups for that.
And then someone said that presumably the ancestry field is used to develop these detailed categories in the selected population American Indian, Alaska Native tables. Is there any documentation about those methods? For example, which ancestry responses were included in each category so that someone could try to replicate those using PUMs, for example?
Again, I think the question was, does ancestry information lend itself to us identifying the race and American Indian, Alaska Native groups? I think they are separate. So again, you can go to that SPT and documentation link, and you can see a complete list of our race population groups, ancestry, country of origin. We have a complete list of all of our groups that are in that SPT AIANT documentation.
Okay.
I just wanted to comment on that to follow up on what Talise shared. So for ancestry, the way you would, if you're interested in looking at ancestry groups on data.census.gov, in the topics filter, we just focused on race and ethnicity, but there's another filter, populations and people, and that's how you can access the ancestry data. And yes, it is separate. Ancestry is a separate question from Hispanic origin and race. So yeah, you can access the ancestry in a different way for our selected population tables and American Indian Alaska Native tables.
As well as table SO201 as well.
Great. It is just about 3 o'clock. I'm going to ask one more question, and maybe this is for you, Alicia. It's how does the change to the 2 or more race categories, how might that impact analysis of other categories of race?
That is an excellent question, and I think, at least from my perspective, I think it's too soon to fully answer it. It's possible that folks at the Census Bureau have done more analysis, but I'd continue to iterate what I said in my presentation is kind of look at how the different combinations of people in different groups may have changed across time, and think through how that could impact your analysis.
Yeah, and just to add on to that a little, we just got the 2021 data last Thursday. Obviously, the 2020 data were experimental, so we are kind of just getting our first look at some of these single-year ACS data. I think there will be a lot more interesting analyses in the future. I am going to wrap up here. I want to thank all the panelists and everyone who joined today. Lots of very good questions, topics raised in this webinar, and I would encourage you, if you're not currently a member of the ACS online community, we encourage you to join. This is an online forum. It's free, and it's a place where you can continue this conversation, and I'm going to try to put a link to this, the online community, in the chat as well. So I encourage you to take a look. And as I noted, we will send a link to the slides and then the recording of this webinar in the next few days. So thanks again to all the presenters. Appreciate you taking the time. And that concludes today's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.